Hi everyone, it's Miss Reed. And like I said, I am going to try and make videos for you every Monday and Wednesday, so happy Monday. I know today is the day that lots of you are getting busy in school with your teachers online, maybe starting to meet with them or have conversations with them. I know you're hardworking, helping your brains keep growing. We're still thinking about the character trait of problem solving. It's still April. And last week we read that story about Calvin, the bird who couldn't fly. And there were a couple of problems that got solved. One is when he couldn't fly, his friends and family tied string around him and lifted him off the ground. That was a good way to solve that problem. But the other problem that got solved was that when they didn't know what a storm was and what danger they were in, he used all the things that he had learned from books and helped them hide and be safe. So that was a good way to solve those problems. One of the things that I realized is that I have a problem to solve because after I read that story and made the video, I didn't really like the way you couldn't see the pictures very well. And all of this distance learning is new for everyone, including me. So I thought maybe I would try a different way of reading a book to you today. I'm going to show you the pictures and you won't see my face, but you'll hear my voice as I'm reading it. And that way you'll be able to see the great illustrations in the book and hear the story at the same time. It's a story about a boy who tells a rumor and it creates a problem for someone and the problem has to get solved. And it's a story that has a pretty complicated idea in it about what rumors can do. And so maybe second grade on up might understand, but you could certainly watch this book for kindergarten and first graders and maybe just talk to them a little bit about how the problem gets solved and how big it can get when you start a rumor. So shall we give this a try? Let's do it. The name of the story is called Mr. Peabody's Apples, and it is written by Madonna. She's a famous singer and performer, but she's also an author. There's a picture of the town that the story takes place. And it's about a boy named Billy Little and Mr. Peabody. And written by Madonna and illustrated by Lauren Long. The name of the town that they live in is called Hapville. And there's a little clue about what some of the story is going to be about. Looks like baseball. Here we go. In the town of Hapville, which wasn't a very big town, Mr. Peabody was congratulating his Little League team on a great game. They had not won, but nobody really cared because they had such a good time playing. Mr. Peabody was the history teacher at the local elementary school, and in the summertime he dedicated every Saturday to organizing baseball games with other schools. Billy Little, who wasn't a very big boy, was one of Mr. Peabody's students. He loved baseball more than anything, and he thought Mr. Peabody was the greatest. After each game, he would always stay to help pick up all the balls and bats, and when they were finished, Mr. Peabody would smile and say, "Thanks, Billy. Good job. I'll see you next Saturday." Then he would start his walk home from along the main street of Hapville, which wasn't a very big street. He would be waving to everyone he knew, and everyone would wave hello back. Along the way, he always passed Mr. Funkadeli's fruit market. Here Mr. Peabody would stop and admire Mr. Funkadeli's fresh apples. He would pick out the shiniest apple, drop it in his bag, and continue on his way. Across the street, Tommy Titlebottom watched with curiosity as Mr. Peabody walked away with the apple. "That's strange," Tommy said to himself. "Mr. Peabody didn't pay anyone for that apple." Tommy got on his skateboard and rushed to tell his friends. The following Saturday, Mr. Peabody's team played another game, and they lost as usual, but no one really seemed to care because they had such a good time playing. Billy picked up the balls and bats, and Mr. Peabody set off for his walk home. He waved at everyone he knew, and they all waved back. And once again, He stopped outside Mr. Funkadeli's fruit market, and he picked up the shiniest apple, and he dropped it in his bag, and he continued on his way. Across the street, Tommy Titlebottom and his friends watched Mr. Peabody, and they were amazed at what they saw. Mr. Peabody had not paid for his apple. They could not wait to tell all of their friends, who told their parents, who told their neighbors, who told their friends in the town of Hapville, which wasn't a very big town. The Saturday after that, Mr. Peabody was standing all alone in the baseball field, wondering where everybody was. Then he saw Billy walking toward him with a sad look on his face. "Hello, Billy. I'm glad you're here, but where is the rest of the team?" asked Mr. Peabody. Billy remained silent. "What is it, Billy?" he asked again. Billy didn't look up. "Everybody thinks you're a thief," he said to the ground. Mr. Peabody looked confused. He took off his hat and scratched his head. "Who says I'm a thief, Billy? And what did I steal?" he asked. "Tommy Titlebottom and his friends said they saw you take an apple from Mr. Funkadeli's fruit market twice, and they said you didn't pay for them," answered Billy. "Ah," said Mr. Peabody, putting his hat back on his head. "Let's go and talk to Mr. Funkadeli about it, shall we?" Boy, Billy looks pretty sad. Maybe a little disappointed, too. Let's find out what Mr. Funkadeli has to say. They walked down the main street, which wasn't a very big street, and Mr. Peabody waved to all the people he knew. But now, some of them did not wave back, and some pretended they did not even see him. They finally arrived at Mr. Funkadeli's fruit market. Out popped Mr. Funkadeli, who said, "Hey, what are you doing here, Mr. Peabody? Why aren't you at the game?" "Oh, there was no game today," said Mr. Peabody. "And I was wondering if I could take my apple a little earlier than usual." "Sure, why not?" replied Mr. Funkadeli. "You pay for them every Saturday morning when you pick up your milk. You can take them whenever you like. Do you want a big shiny one, Mr. Peabody?" Mr. Peabody took his apple, smiled, and offered it to Billy. "I'd like to take that apple, Mr. Peabody, but I have to go and find Tommy and explain everything," said Billy. "Well, when you find him, ask him to come over to my house. I'd like to speak to him too," replied Mr. Peabody. A little while later, Billy found Tommy and told him what had happened with the apples. He told Tommy that Mr. Peabody wanted to speak to him right away. So off Tommy ran, and when he arrived, he rang the doorbell, and Mr. Peabody came to the door. They looked at each other for a while. "Oh dear, Mr. Peabody," said Tommy on the doorstep. "I didn't understand. I should not have said what I said, but it looked like you hadn't paid for the apples." Mr. Peabody's eyebrows went up a little, and he felt a warm breeze across his face. "It doesn't matter what it looked like. What matters is the truth." Tommy looked down at his shoes and he said, "I am so sorry. What can I do to make things better now?" Mr. Peabody took a deep breath and he looked up at the small cloud that was in the sky and he said, "I'll tell you what, Tommy. Meet me at the baseball diamond in 1 hour and bring a pillow stuffed with feathers." "Okay," said Tommy, who then ran off to his house to get a pillow. An hour later, Tommy met Mr. Peabody on the pitcher's mound. "Hello, Tommy," said Mr. Peabody. "Follow me and bring your pillow." Tommy followed Mr. Peabody to the top of the bleachers, wondering what this was all about. "It's a windy day, isn't it?" asked Mr. Peabody when they reached the top. Tommy nodded his head in agreement. "Here's a pair of scissors. Now cut the pillow in half and shake the feathers out." Tommy looked confused, but he did it anyways. He thought it was a small price to pay to gain Mr. Peabody's forgiveness. The wind carried thousands of feathers far and wide. Whoa, look at all those feathers. I don't know if you've ever seen a feather pillow or felt one before, but the feathers are so tiny inside those pillows. And if you cut one open, there would just be thousands of them. And on a windy day, whew, they could go far. Let's find out why Mr. Peabody wanted him to do that. Tommy looked relieved and he said, "Is that all I have to do to make things better?" "There's one more thing," said Mr. Peabody. "Now you must go and pick up all the feathers." Tommy frowned. "I don't think it's possible to pick up all the feathers," Tommy replied. "Well, it would be just as impossible to undo the damage you've done by spreading the rumor that I'm a thief," said Mr. Peabody. "Each feather represents a person in Hapville." This book is a metaphor. There was a long pause as Tommy began to understand what Mr. Peabody was saying. Finally, he said, "I guess I have a lot of work ahead of me." Mr. Peabody smiled and said, "Indeed you do. Next time, don't be so quick to judge a person, and remember the power of your words." Then he handed Tommy a shiny red apple, and he made his way home. The end. And you can see his pillow got stitched up, but it doesn't look like it's nearly as big as it was when it started, so it doesn't seem like maybe he was able to find all the feathers. That means he wasn't able to repair all the damage he did with his rumor. One of the things I like about this story is that it shows how to say sorry, because when Tommy apologized to Mr. Peabody, his apology was sincere. He looked right at him, he said the words like he meant it, and then Mr. Peabody told him how to fix it. One idea about problem solving is to be able to say you're sorry to someone and do it in a way where you really mean it, without any excuses, and then fix the problem. And if someone is apologizing to you, it's a great idea to take a deep breath and just say, "Thanks for your apology," or "I accept that," because that's how problems get solved and then we move on. I hope you have a great week, Shaver Tigers. I sure do miss you. Keep solving problems, and I'll see you next time.